Morning fog clings to the Blue Ridge foothills. Stone surfaces sweat with cold. Water moves somewhere inside the walls. The house stands finished and watchful. It does not feel asleep. It feels managed. This is the Biltmore Estate, completed in 1895, rising without sound above land reshaped by intent. The stillness carries a cost. Heat circulates. Air is dried. Systems work even when no one looks. That labor once belonged to hundreds of unseen hands. Today it belongs to machines and schedules. Visitors slow as they cross the threshold. Footsteps echo longer than expected. Sound thins. Space presses outward. Records suggest this reaction is common. Some feel awe. Others feel unease. Both responses are engineered. The architecture was designed to dominate perception before conversation begins. This calm was never free. It was purchased, staffed, and maintained minute by minute. When attention slips, decay follows. Stone cracks, wood warps, moisture wins. The house teaches this quietly. The tension sits under the beauty and does not leave. A question forms before any history is explained. What happens to a place built to feel eternal when the watching finally stops? As the mist lifts, the scale asserts itself. Towers appear first, then wings, then depth. The eye searches for an edge and fails. This was intentional. The architect, trained in European precedent, understood how mass affects emotion. Grandeur here is not defensive. It is psychological. Guests were meant to feel small before they spoke. Historians believe this strategy answered a private anxiety shared by new industrial wealth. America had money. It lacked inherited legitimacy. The building attempts to supply that absence all at once. The consequence is pressure. Space stretches time. Corridors lengthen decisions. Ceilings diminish voices. Visitors instinctively lower their tone. The house sets terms. Yet this scale also isolates its owner. Records indicate that only a fraction of rooms were used daily. Maintenance expanded faster than comfort. Awe did not equal ease. The effect persists today. Some interpret the sensation as presence. Others cite acoustics, proportion, and expectation. Both explanations fit the evidence. The structure does not explain itself. It confronts. Another question sharpens as admiration settles into weight. Can architecture manufacture belonging without exacting a cost? The silence answers nothing. Facts interrupt the mood. The house measures roughly 175,000 square feet. It contains 250 rooms. There are 35 bedrooms and 43 bathrooms. 65 fireplaces punctuate the plan, most rarely lit. Construction lasted 6 years, beginning in 1889 and finishing in 1895. Contemporary estimates suggest a modern equivalent cost exceeding $1 billion. These numbers impress quickly. They also escalate risk. Every system scales with them. Heat, humidity, cleaning, security. Nothing rests. Maintenance schedules multiply. Costs recur annually. Failure compounds quietly. This arithmetic governs survival here. Historians note that such magnitude converts beauty into obligation. The building demands constant attention to remain calm. Without it, deterioration accelerates. Wood dries or swells. Stone sheds water imperfectly. Art and books require narrow climate ranges. The emotional effect follows the math. Grandeur becomes vigilance. Visitors sense order and mistake it for ease. It is not. This is controlled stability. The numbers explain the tension felt earlier without resolving it. They raise a practical question beneath the awe. How long can attention, money, and labor keep pace with a structure that never forgives neglect? And it never sleeps. Beneath the visible rooms of the Biltmore Estate, runs another architecture entirely. It is narrow, efficient, and deliberately hidden. Servant corridors cut behind walls. Staircases turn sharply away from public sight lines. Service elevators rise without ceremony. Records indicate more than 400 staff once worked here, many living on site. Their role was precision, not presence. Bells summoned them. Indicator boards tracked them. Meals were taken separately. Movement was timed to avoid notice. This system preserved the illusion that the house functioned on its own. The emotional cost was distance. Workers became part of the mechanism. Their labor was essential, but unseen. When guests experienced calm, it was because someone else absorbed urgency. Historians suggest this separation reflected broader Gilded Age hierarchies where comfort depended on invisibility. The consequence appears later. When labor thins, the illusion collapses quickly. Today, visitors walk areas never meant for them. The machinery of service is exposed. Some describe this as eerie. Others see it as structural honesty. Both interpretations emerge from the same fact. The house was designed to hide effort. The question deepens with each revealed corridor. What else was built to disappear here, and at what cost? The longer one studies the Biltmore Estate, the more the timeline feels compressed. European castles expanded over centuries. This one arrived nearly complete. That decision mattered. It eliminated gradual adaptation. There was no testing phase, no slow correction. Everything depended on permanence from the start. Historians believe this urgency reflected a fear of impermanence, common among newly wealthy families. Money arrived faster than legitimacy. Architecture was asked to close that gap immediately. The emotion embedded here is impatience. Grandeur was not grown. It was asserted. The consequence was fragility. When conditions changed, the structure could not easily shrink. Taxes rose. Labor costs shifted. Economic stability wavered. The building remained fixed. Its needs did not adjust. This imbalance drives much of what follows. The house looks timeless. Its finances were not. Visitors often mistake scale for security. Records suggest the opposite. Large systems fail dramatically when stressed. The pressure builds quietly at first. Then it accelerates. This tension explains why admiration here often carries unease. The question returns with sharper edges. Can something designed to feel ancient survive in a modern world that moves faster than stone can endure? George Vanderbilt's intentions shape every decision embedded in the Biltmore Estate. He was not a political figure. He was not a factory builder. He was a collector of ideas, books, and landscapes. Records show he read thousands of volumes and traveled extensively through Europe. The house reflects study rather than conquest. Yet the scale contradicts the personality. A private man created a public monument. Historians believe this tension is central to understanding the estate. It was both refuge and declaration. Vanderbilt sought isolation, but he built it in stone large enough to be seen for miles. The emotional consequence was solitude amplified. The house did not solve the problem it addressed. It magnified it. Records indicate Vanderbilt used only a small portion of rooms regularly. Maintenance expanded, regardless. The building required attention even when its owner withdrew. This imbalance mattered after his death. Systems outlived intent. The estate continued demanding care without guidance. Some interpret the lingering presence felt here as something paranormal. Others point to emptiness, scale, and expectation. Both views arise from the same absence. The structure remains expressive. The builder does not. The unresolved question tightens. When intention disappears, What truly remains embedded in the walls? Purpose or momentum? Construction at the Biltmore Estate began in earnest in 1889, and the land resisted immediately. Hills were cut back, roads were carved, rail spurs were extended to deliver stone, timber, and steel. Nothing about the site was passive. Progress required force. Records show that more than 1,000 workers cycled through the project over 6 years. Skilled craftsmen worked beside unskilled laborers. Hours were long. Safety standards were inconsistent by modern measures. Accidents occurred. Some were fatal. Exact numbers remain unclear, a common gap in 19th century documentation. This uncertainty itself is revealing. The emotional atmosphere during construction was pressure without pause. Deadlines loomed, expectations escalated. The house demanded completion as a single gesture, not a gradual evolution. The consequence was exhaustion embedded into the process. Momentum replaced caution. Each delay increased cost. Each correction increased risk. The estate rose anyway. Visitors today see only finished stone. They do not see repetition, injury, or fatigue. Yet those conditions shaped the structure as much as design drawings did. This creates a subtle dissonance. Beauty stands on effort that was never meant to be remembered. The question sharpens. What parts of this place were paid for with time that never returned? Materials moved constantly toward the Biltmore Estate, and money moved faster. Indiana limestone arrived by rail. Wood was sourced, milled, and replaced when warped. Imported elements competed with local supply. Records suggest cost projections were exceeded early and often. This was not unexpected. Large projects rarely behave. What matters is response. Instead of scaling back, the vision hardened. Systems were added, not removed. Redundancy increased. The emotional shift was subtle but decisive. Caution gave way to commitment. Once invested, retreat felt impossible. The consequence was financial inertia. Every additional feature raised future obligations. Maintenance was built into the walls before the house opened. Historians note that this pattern mirrors broader Gilded Age behavior, where wealth encouraged escalation rather than restraint. The estate became a fixed point around which resources revolved. When external conditions changed, the building could not adapt easily. Visitors now experience seamless integration. At the time, integration meant risk layered on risk. Each innovation increased dependence on skilled labor and constant oversight. The house was modern. That modernity aged quickly. This raises a quieter question beneath the spectacle. Was innovation here a strength or another liability waiting for time to expose it? The technological profile of the Biltmore Estate was extraordinary for its era. The house included electric lighting when many nearby towns did not. Central heating circulated through miles of pipe. Indoor plumbing served dozens of bathrooms. Elevators moved people and goods vertically. Ice-making machines supported food storage year-round. These systems worked together, but they did not simplify life. They multiplied points of failure. Each innovation required expertise. Repairs were constant. Records indicate that specialized staff were needed simply to keep the house operational. This scale changes the meaning of luxury. Convenience becomes dependency. If power failed, darkness followed quickly. If humidity shifted, books and art suffered. The numbers clarify the risk. One house contained infrastructure rivaling small institutions. Maintenance never paused. This technical ambition impressed guests and reinforced status. It also locked the estate into perpetual vigilance. Historians suggest this was an early lesson in the hidden costs of modernity. The building could not rest. Neither could those responsible for it. Today, visitors admire seamless function without sensing the labor behind it. The calm feels natural. It is not. The numbers expose a final tension. When innovation outruns sustainability, does progress strengthen a legacy or quietly destabilize it from within? By the time the Biltmore Estate neared completion, warning signs were already present. Costs had exceeded early expectations. Timelines stretched. Systems required constant adjustment. Yet the exterior projected certainty. Completion day arrived with ceremony and relief. The house appeared finished. That appearance mattered. Guests saw symmetry, scale, and order. What they did not see was how fragile that balance already was. The emotional shift was confidence layered over strain. Success felt earned, but it was also exhausting. The consequence followed quietly. From the first day, the house consumed resources at a pace that never slowed. There was no settling in. There was only continuation. Fires had to be managed, climate monitored, staff coordinated. Every pause created risk. Historians suggest that this moment marked the true beginning of the estate's struggle, not its triumph. Completion did not end pressure. It formalized it. The building now had to perform indefinitely. Visitors mistook stillness for stability. The house knew the difference. The question tightens without announcement. When a project demands perfection forever, when does success become a liability rather than a reward? Life inside the Biltmore Estate followed routines that left little room for spontaneity. Meals were scheduled, fires were tended, corridors were patrolled, climate systems were adjusted daily. Records indicate that even minor disruptions rippled quickly through the household. Comfort depended on coordination. The emotional atmosphere was controlled calm. Guests experienced leisure. Staff experienced timing. This imbalance sustained the illusion. The consequence was rigidity. Adaptation became difficult. When economic or social conditions shifted, the routines could not easily bend. The house did not forgive improvisation. It required consistency. Historians note that large estates often collapse not from a single shock, but from accumulated inflexibility. The estate's size magnified this risk. Every decision affected multiple systems. Today, visitors describe the space as serene. That serenity is engineered. It is maintained against entropy. Some interpret the tension they feel as something paranormal. Others attribute it to scale and silence. Both interpretations emerge from the same structure. The house absorbs movement and gives little back. This raises a subtle but persistent question. Does a place this regulated ever truly belong to the people inside it, or do they simply pass through its requirements? Financial reality eventually pressed harder than routine. Taxes increased. Labor costs rose. Agricultural income fluctuated. The Biltmore Estate did not shrink its needs when external pressures grew. Records suggest that even during periods of prosperity, the margin for error was narrow. This imbalance mattered after George Vanderbilt's death in 1914. Leadership shifted. Certainty weakened. The emotional tone changed from ambition to preservation. The consequence was contraction. Land sales followed. Large portions of the original acreage were sold to stabilize finances. This was not failure, it was survival. Historians emphasize that this decision preserved the core estate at the cost of its original vision. Scale was reduced to protect continuity. Visitors today walk grounds that represent a fraction of the original plan. The house appears unchanged. The surrounding reality is not. This selective endurance shapes modern perception. Grandeur remains, Context has thinned, the estate adapted by surrendering size. That trade-off lingers in every tour narrative. The question returns, now grounded in evidence rather than feeling. What defines legacy more clearly? Holding everything, or choosing what must be let go to endure? Opening the Biltmore Estate to the public marked a radical shift. What had been private became transactional. Tradition bent under necessity. Records show that this decision was met with mixed reactions. Some saw preservation, others saw exposure. Emotionally, it was both. The consequence was transformation. Tourism introduced revenue. It also introduced scrutiny. The house gained a new role as a cultural artifact rather than a lived environment. Systems adjusted again, staff expanded, interpretation replaced intimacy. Visitors arrived seeking wonder, history, and sometimes mystery. Stories followed. Reports of footsteps, cold zones, unease in unused rooms. Folklore framed these sensations as haunting. Practical explanations cite acoustics, temperature variation, and expectation. Neither fully resolves the experience. The ambiguity persists because the structure supports it. The house is no longer a home. It is an object of attention. That attention keeps it alive. Without it, decay would resume quickly. Preservation now depends on curiosity. This creates a final tension that remains unresolved. When survival requires being watched, what changes in the meaning of a place once built for withdrawal and control? During the Second World War, the Biltmore Estate assumed a role never imagined by its builder. Records confirm that priceless artworks from Washington, D.C., including pieces from the National Gallery, were transported and stored inside the house for protection. The choice was practical. The location was inland. The structure was massive. Climate control already existed. The emotional shift was subtle but significant. The mansion moved from private symbol to national utility. Its isolation became an asset rather than a preference. The consequence was a temporary alignment between excess and necessity. Rooms designed for leisure now guarded cultural memory. Staff adapted routines again. Silence took on a new purpose. This episode complicates later interpretations of the estate as purely indulgent. For a brief period, scale served something larger than status. Yet this role was temporary. When the artworks left, the house returned to its previous tension. Purpose receded. Obligation remained. Historians note that such moments often extend the life of monumental structures by justifying their upkeep. The building survived because it could be useful when required. The question sharpens through this detour. Is survival earned through meaning, or simply postponed by relevance when circumstance demands it? Modern operations at the Biltmore Estate function less like a household and more like an institution. Preservation dictates daily decisions. Climate sensors monitor humidity. Engineers inspect aging systems. Conservators evaluate stone, wood, and paper. Records indicate that failure to maintain even one system risks cascading damage. The emotional atmosphere is vigilance rather than pride. Beauty here requires constant defense. The consequence is dependence on revenue. Tourism is no longer optional. It is structural. Millions of visitors arrive annually, each footstep funding repair while accelerating wear. This paradox defines the estate's present condition. Preservation and erosion advance together. Staff manage flow carefully. Routes are chosen to protect fragile areas. Some rooms remain closed for years. Visitors interpret absence as mystery. In practice, it is triage. The house survives by limiting access to itself. This tension fuels speculation. Paranormal narratives flourish where doors remain shut. Practical explanations point to conservation needs. Both coexist because the estate cannot reveal everything without risking damage. The building has learned restraint. The question becomes increasingly pragmatic. How much of the past can be shared before preservation itself becomes impossible? Stories persist at the Biltmore Estate long after original occupants are gone. Staff and visitors report sensations rather than events. Footsteps without source. Sudden cold pockets. The feeling of being watched. Folklore labels these experiences as hauntings. Historians and engineers offer alternatives. Temperature differentials between stone and air create drafts. Sound travels unpredictably through long corridors. Expectation shapes perception. None of these explanations fully cancels the reports. The ambiguity remains productive. It keeps attention focused. The emotional response is curiosity mixed with restraint. Official narratives avoid confirmation. They also avoid denial. This balance is intentional. The estate functions as both historical site and experiential space. Mystery attracts without overwhelming fact. The consequence is sustained engagement. Visitors debate rather than conclude. Comments accumulate. Interest renews. The house benefits from unresolved questions. This does not require belief. It requires participation. The structure's scale amplifies sensation regardless of interpretation. Large empty spaces behave differently. Silence carries weight. The building offers no reassurance. It does not need to. The final tension approaches clarity. When architecture provokes feeling without explanation, does meaning arise from the structure itself, or from the minds moving through it? Today, the Biltmore Estate endures through adaptation rather than certainty. It is no longer a private refuge. It is no longer a symbol of unchecked wealth. It is a managed legacy. Stone remains. Systems persist. Memory is curated. Records show that annual maintenance costs reach tens of millions of dollars. This reality frames every decision. Preservation competes with access. Authenticity competes with survival. The emotional residue of the place reflects this compromise. Visitors sense beauty, but also distance. The house does not invite ownership. It invites observation. This may be its final form, a structure that survives by being studied, questioned, and debated. The original ambition to feel eternal has been replaced by a more fragile goal: to last one more generation, then another. The estate no longer promises permanence. It negotiates for it. This evolution closes most of the narrative loops. Scale led to strain. Strain forced reinvention. Reinvention preserved form at the cost of function. One question remains, intentionally unresolved. When legacy depends on constant care and public attention, is endurance a triumph of vision, or evidence that some creations outlive their purpose only by refusing to disappear? Long-term survival at the Biltmore Estate depends on systems most visitors never notice. Dehumidifiers run continuously. Roof slate is inspected piece by piece. Stone joints are repointed on rotating schedules that span decades. Records indicate that neglect in one season can undo years of conservation work. The emotional reality behind this process is patience under pressure. Nothing dramatic signals failure at first. Damage accumulates silently. The consequence is permanent loss if response is delayed. This is why preservation decisions often appear conservative or restrictive. Access is limited not to create mystery, but to slow entropy. Historians note that many Gilded Age estates failed precisely because owners underestimated this phase. Building was celebrated. Maintenance was ignored. Biltmore survived because it eventually acknowledged this imbalance. The house shifted from statement to responsibility. Visitors often admire scale without sensing fragility. Yet fragility defines the present. The estate exists in a constant state of managed risk. This reframes earlier interpretations of excess. Grandeur did not end with completion. It simply changed form. The question that lingers becomes less romantic and more structural. Can any creation designed to exceed human scale ever be maintained without becoming a permanent negotiation against time? Public perception of the Biltmore Estate often lags behind its operational reality. Many arrive expecting a frozen artifact. What they encounter is an active system. Staff numbers shift seasonally. Conservation priorities change annually. Records show that preservation plans extend decades into the future, yet are revised constantly. The emotional tension lies in this contradiction. The house appears stable. Its management is adaptive. This duality fuels fascination. Visitors sense continuity while change works quietly underneath. The consequence is a narrative gap. Myths grow where process remains invisible. Paranormal explanations thrive in these gaps. So do romantic assumptions about wealth and ease. Practical explanations exist, but they lack drama. The estate does not correct every misconception. Engagement matters more than resolution. Historians suggest that this ambiguity has become part of the estate's modern identity. It encourages return visits. It sustains discussion. The house remains relevant by resisting closure. This is not accidental. Cultural landmarks often survive by allowing multiple readings. The structure holds facts. Interpretation moves around them. The question that surfaces is subtle but persistent. Does preserving history require controlling meaning or letting uncertainty become part of what endures? Comparisons between the Biltmore Estate and European castles often miss a critical distinction. Medieval castles were built to defend territory and authority. This house was built to simulate lineage. Historians emphasize that it lacks defensive logic, no battlements, no strategic elevation for warfare. Its power is symbolic. This difference shapes interpretation. European castles evolved through conflict. Biltmore arrived fully formed, untouched by siege or succession. The emotional effect is paradoxical. It feels ancient without having endured what usually creates age. The consequence is fragility, masked as permanence. When pressure arrived, it came economically rather than militarily. The house responded not with fortification, but with adaptation. Land was sold. Purpose shifted. Access expanded. This response was effective, but revealing. It exposed the limits of symbolic power. The building could not defend itself through dominance alone. It required cooperation with the public. Visitors now supply what armies once protected elsewhere. This inversion defines its legacy. Grandeur survives through participation, not control. The comparison closes one loop while opening another. If imitation of history can outlast original forms through flexibility, what does that suggest about authenticity and endurance? Standing inside the Biltmore Estate today, one senses accumulation rather than resolution. Layers of intent overlap: private refuge, social statement, national storage, tourist destination. Each phase left traces. None fully erased the last. The emotional result is density, not just of space, but of meaning. Visitors move through rooms carrying different expectations. Some seek history. Some seek atmosphere. Some seek answers to sensations they cannot name. The house accommodates all without confirming any. This restraint is deliberate. The consequence is longevity. Sites that dictate meaning too firmly often age poorly. Biltmore avoids that fate by allowing interpretation to remain open. Yet the facts remain firm. Scale created strain. Strain forced reinvention. Reinvention required sacrifice. What survived did so by changing its role. This progression completes the factual arc. One reflective question remains, intentionally unanswered. When a place endures by continuously reshaping itself to meet the needs of others, does it preserve its original identity? Or does survival itself become the only legacy that truly lasts? As decades passed, the mansion's meaning drifted further from its origin. What began as a personal retreat hardened into a symbol others needed to interpret. Wealth no longer defined it. Survival did. The estate became a case study in endurance rather than excess. Decisions were no longer aesthetic first. They were strategic. Roofs were repaired before rooms were restored. Systems were upgraded quietly, without spectacle. The emotional shift was acceptance. Grandeur could no longer be protected by pride alone. It required humility. This change altered how the house was experienced. Awe remained, but certainty faded. Visitors sensed layers rather than clarity. The consequence was a new kind of tension. Preservation demanded compromise. Some spaces were simplified. Others were closed entirely. Authenticity became selective. Historians note that this is common in long-lived monuments. They survive by choosing which version of themselves to protect. This choice is rarely neutral. Every preserved detail implies another sacrificed. The building learned to prioritize continuity over completeness. The illusion of timelessness softened into managed endurance. This evolution reframes earlier questions about ambition. Perhaps the true cost was not money or land, but the gradual surrender of the original dream in exchange for ongoing existence. Large, empty spaces behave differently than occupied ones. Sound lingers. Temperature shifts unpredictably. Light pools in corners without purpose. These conditions shape perception. People feel watched where nothing moves. They feel presence where only architecture remains. This is not unique to this house. It is common in oversized structures built for fewer occupants than their scale implies. Paranormal interpretations flourish in these environments because the human brain searches for agency. Engineers offer simpler explanations: air currents, structural acoustics, delayed echoes. Both explanations coexist without conflict. The emotional response is real, regardless of cause. The consequence is narrative. Stories attach themselves to silence. They persist because silence does not contradict them. The house becomes a canvas for unresolved feeling. This does not diminish its historical value. It expands it. Meaning is no longer fixed to dates or owners. It circulates through experience. Visitors contribute as much as archives do. This exchange sustains relevance. The building no longer needs certainty to attract attention. It needs participation. This raises a subtle implication. When history becomes experiential rather than declarative, authority shifts from record to response. That shift changes how legacy is felt. Over time, maintenance replaced memory as the estate's dominant concern. Budgets dictated narratives. Staffing levels shaped access. Preservation plans stretched forward in 10- and 20-year increments. This future orientation altered how the past was presented. Stories were curated to support continuity. Fragile truths were handled carefully. The emotional tone became measured. Not reverent, not defensive, practical. The consequence was stability without closure. Visitors received enough information to feel grounded, but not enough to exhaust curiosity. This balance proved effective. Interest sustained itself. The house avoided becoming static. Instead, It functioned as a living process. Historians suggest this approach distinguishes surviving estates from those that failed. Survival favors adaptability over completeness. The building's current identity is therefore incomplete by design. It resists final interpretation. That resistance keeps it alive culturally. Physically, it remains under constant negotiation with time. Stone is patient. Systems are not. Every year introduces new risks, new costs, new decisions. This ongoing pressure reframes the original ambition. The goal is no longer to feel eternal. It is to remain relevant long enough to justify care. That shift marks the final transformation from monument to organism. At the end of the tour, many visitors pause without realizing why. The reaction is quiet, thoughtful. The house does not instruct them how to feel. It simply withdraws. What remains is accumulation, scale, labor, money, silence, adaptation, loss, survival. These elements coexist without hierarchy. No single explanation resolves them. That is the estate's final condition. It is neither triumph nor cautionary tale alone. It is evidence. Evidence that beauty can demand sacrifice. Evidence that ambition can outlive intention. Evidence that survival often requires surrender rather than strength. The structure stands because it learned to change roles repeatedly. Each change left residue. None erased the last. This layered endurance invites reflection rather than conclusion. Viewers are left not with a lesson, but with a question that refuses efficiency. When something so large persists only through constant care, compromise, and reinterpretation, what exactly is being preserved? The original vision, the physical form, or humanity's unwillingness to let its grandest efforts disappear? Time alters power structures quietly. What once required private fortune now depends on collective participation. The estate's survival is no longer dictated by lineage or inheritance. It is dictated by attendance, relevance, and attention. This shift changes the emotional contract between place and people. Visitors are no longer guests. They are stakeholders. Each ticket supports preservation while subtly reshaping meaning. The consequence is shared responsibility without shared ownership. No one person carries the burden that once nearly crushed a single family. Instead, the weight is distributed. This model works. It also transforms the relationship to history. Grandeur becomes conditional. Continuation replaces dominance. The house remains impressive, but it is no longer unquestioned. Scrutiny accompanies admiration. This balance stabilizes survival. Yet it introduces a quiet tension. When preservation depends on popularity, decisions tilt toward appeal. Interpretation becomes strategic. Silence becomes selective. Historians note that this is the cost of endurance in public memory. The building trades authority for access. It survives by listening to the present. That trade-off closes another loop. Wealth created the structure. Community sustains it. The unresolved question shifts scale. Is legacy stronger when guarded by few or when diluted among many? The estate's landscape tells a parallel story. Forests once managed as experiments now function as buffers. Gardens designed for display require constant renewal. Nature here is not wild, it is negotiated. This negotiation mirrors the house itself. Control softens over time. Maintenance replaces dominance. The emotional tone is stewardship rather than mastery. Early ambitions sought to command land. Modern priorities seek to stabilize it. The consequence is continuity without conquest. The land survives by being managed, not exploited. Historians often point to this shift as one of the estate's most lasting contributions. sustainable forestry outlived architectural spectacle. Trees planted for experimentation now define the horizon. Visitors feel calm without realizing why. That calm is engineered. It requires planning, labor, and restraint. Nature, like architecture, does not maintain itself at this scale. The estate learned this lesson slowly. Land was preserved because it adapted to limits. This reframes the meaning of ownership. Control gave way to care. The question that emerges is less dramatic, but more enduring. When power relinquishes dominance in favor of maintenance, does it lose status or gain a different kind of permanence? Economic cycles leave marks even when stone does not. Recessions reduced staffing. Prosperity expanded access. Each fluctuation altered how the estate functioned. These adjustments were rarely visible to visitors. They were felt internally. The emotional reality was vigilance. Plans were made years ahead, then rewritten. Preservation demanded foresight without certainty. The consequence was institutional resilience. The estate became skilled at absorbing shock without collapse. This ability distinguishes it from many contemporaries that failed. Survival was not accidental. It was learned. Mistakes informed restraint. Excess gave way to calculation. The building's presence feels constant because adaptation happens quietly. Historians emphasize that this silence is deceptive. Continuity requires continuous effort. Without it, decline accelerates rapidly. This awareness governs every decision today. The house is not frozen in time. It is balanced against it. Visitors sense stability. Operators manage fragility. That duality defines the present condition. The estate exists in a narrow corridor between decay and relevance. This corridor must be walked daily. The unresolved question sharpens once more. How long can adaptation substitute for origin before a place becomes something entirely new? In the end, the mansion resists a single reading. It is not merely a monument to wealth. It is not solely a lesson in excess. It is a record of choices made under pressure and revised under necessity. Each era left evidence, some visible, some buried. Visitors carry away different impressions because the structure accommodates contradiction. Grandeur and fragility coexist. Silence and activity overlap. History and speculation share space without resolution. This complexity sustains interest. It prevents closure. That is its quiet strength. The estate does not demand belief. It invites observation. Paranormal narratives persist because uncertainty is permitted. Historical narratives endure because documentation remains firm. Neither eliminates the other. The house functions as a mirror for expectation. What one brings determines what is felt. This dynamic ensures longevity. Places that insist on a single meaning often fade. This one adapts by allowing questions to survive. The final reflection is unavoidable and deliberately unanswered. When a creation outlives its creator, its context, and even its original purpose, does its continued existence honor the past? Or does it reveal how survival itself becomes the dominant story worth preserving? What remains most striking is how normal this endurance has become. The systems run, the schedules hold, repairs proceed without ceremony. Survival no longer feels dramatic, it feels procedural. This quiet persistence changes how the mansion is perceived. Grandeur fades into routine. Awe becomes background. The emotional shift is subtle resignation, not failure. Acceptance. The building is no longer proving anything. It is managing itself against time. The consequence is a different kind of power. Not dominance, but longevity. Many structures were grander in ambition. Few lasted as long. This one did because it learned restraint late, but effectively. Visitors often sense something heavy here without naming it. That weight comes from accumulation, decisions layered on decisions, effort stacked on effort. Nothing dramatic is required to sustain it now, only continuity. This reveals an uncomfortable truth about monumental creation. The hardest phase is not building, it is continuing. That continuation demands attention without applause, money without spectacle, labor without recognition. The estate survives because it embraced this reality. The question that follows is not romantic, it is practical. How many great works disappear simply because no one is willing to maintain them quietly for long enough? Memory here is curated, not preserved wholesale. Certain stories are emphasized, others recede. This is not deception. It is necessity. Space is finite. Attention is limited. The estate selects what it can afford to remember. The emotional result is partial clarity. Visitors leave informed but not finished. That incompleteness fuels return. The consequence is an evolving narrative rather than a fixed one. Each generation reframes the structure slightly. Cultural values shift. Interpretations follow. What once symbolized wealth now prompts questions about sustainability. What once impressed now invites scrutiny. This evolution does not weaken the place. It keeps it alive. Static monuments age poorly. Responsive ones adapt. The building's ability to absorb reinterpretation may be its greatest strength. Yet this flexibility has limits. Too much change risks erasure. Too little invites decay. Balance is required. That balance is negotiated daily by people most visitors never meet. Curators, engineers, planners. Their decisions shape what survives invisibly. This reveals another layer of cost. Legacy is not self-sustaining. It requires judgment under uncertainty. The final tension sharpens. Who decides which version of the past deserves the resources to continue existing? At a certain point, the mansion stops feeling like an answer and starts functioning as a question. It asks what endurance means when conditions constantly change. It asks how much adaptation alters identity. It asks whether preservation is an act of respect or control. These questions linger because the structure refuses closure. It stands complete, yet unfinished. Maintained, yet vulnerable. Known, yet ambiguous. This balance keeps attention alive. The emotional outcome is reflection rather than resolution. Visitors carry the experience outward. Discussion continues elsewhere. That diffusion sustains relevance. The estate no longer needs certainty. It thrives on inquiry. This may be the final transformation, from private ambition to public conversation, from statement to process. The building's survival depends less on its stone than on its ability to provoke thought. When curiosity fades, funding fades. When funding fades, decay accelerates. This cycle governs its future. The facts are clear. Scale created pressure. Pressure demanded adaptation. Adaptation preserved form at a cost. One question remains intentionally unanswered, because answering it would end the conversation. When beauty survives only through constant negotiation, sacrifice, and collective attention, is its endurance a victory over time? Or proof that nothing grand can last without changing into something else entirely? By now, the mansion's story no longer belongs to a single family, era, or explanation. It belongs to a process. Records, folklore, engineering reports, and visitor reactions coexist without canceling one another. This layered truth is uncomfortable for those seeking a clean conclusion. It is also honest. The building survives because it refuses simplicity. Every solution introduced new dependencies. Every adaptation introduced new vulnerabilities. Preservation is not triumph. It is negotiation. The emotional residue of this place comes from that tension. Visitors sense effort embedded in calm. They feel weight without spectacle. This is not accidental. Large systems leave psychological impressions even when functioning properly. Silence feels intentional. Order feels fragile. Paranormal interpretations emerge because uncertainty remains visible. Rational explanations persist because evidence supports them. Neither dominates. The estate endures in this balance. It does not resolve debate. It hosts it. That hosting has become its modern function. The house no longer asserts meaning. It absorbs inquiry. This absorption sustains relevance in a way permanence never could. The structure teaches without instruction. It demonstrates that survival often requires relinquishing authority over how something is understood. That realization closes nearly every loop built since its foundation. One final uncertainty remains, deliberately untouched. What stands today is not the dream that began this project, but the version that learned to endure. Ambition initiated it. Anxiety shaped it. Adaptation preserved it. Each phase extracted a cost. Money was spent. Land was surrendered. Privacy vanished. Certainty dissolved. What remains is continuity earned through compromise. This is not failure. It is outcome. Many grand works disappear because they refuse to change. This one persisted by allowing itself to be redefined repeatedly. The emotional impact of that persistence is subtle. It does not inspire triumph. It provokes thought. Visitors leave with facts, impressions, and unresolved questions. That unfinished quality is intentional. Closure would signal completion. Completion invites neglect. Ongoing inquiry invites care. The mansion's survival depends on this dynamic. When people argue about meaning, they return. When they return, preservation continues. The structure lives inside that loop. This final reflection is not meant to settle the debate. It is meant to keep it alive. When a creation this vast survives only through constant sacrifice, shared responsibility, and perpetual reinterpretation, what does its endurance ultimately measure? The strength of its original vision, or humanity's refusal to let its grandest efforts quietly disappear? Time alters power structures quietly. What once required private fortune now depends on collective participation. The estate's survival is no longer dictated by lineage or inheritance. It is dictated by attendance, relevance, and attention. This shift changes the emotional contract between place and people. Visitors are no longer guests. They are stakeholders. Each ticket supports preservation while subtly reshaping meaning. The consequence is shared responsibility without shared ownership. No one person carries the burden that once nearly crushed a single family. Instead, the weight is distributed. This model works. It also transforms the relationship to history. Grandeur becomes conditional. Continuation replaces dominance. The house remains impressive, but it is no longer unquestioned. Scrutiny accompanies admiration. This balance stabilizes survival, yet it introduces a quiet tension. When preservation depends on popularity, decisions tilt toward appeal. Interpretation becomes strategic. Silence becomes selective. Historians note that this is the cost of endurance in public memory. The building trades authority for access. It survives by listening to the present. That trade-off closes another loop. Wealth created the structure. Community sustains it. The unresolved question shifts scale. Is legacy stronger when guarded by few, or when diluted among many? The estate's landscape tells a parallel story. Forests once managed as experiments now function as buffers. Gardens designed for display require constant renewal. Nature here is not wild. It is negotiated. This negotiation mirrors the house itself. Control softens over time. Maintenance replaces dominance. The emotional tone is stewardship rather than mastery. Early ambitions sought to command land. Modern priorities seek to stabilize it. The consequence is continuity without conquest. The land survives by being managed, not exploited. Historians often point to this shift as one of the estate's most lasting contributions. Sustainable forestry outlived architectural spectacle. Trees planted for experimentation now define the horizon. Visitors feel calm without realizing why. That calm is engineered. It requires planning, labor, and restraint. Nature, like architecture, does not maintain itself at this scale. The estate learned this lesson slowly. Land was preserved because it adapted to limits. This reframes the meaning of ownership. Control gave way to care. The question that emerges is less dramatic but more enduring. When power relinquishes dominance in favor of maintenance, does it lose status or gain a different kind of permanence? Economic cycles leave marks even when stone does not. Recessions reduced staffing. Prosperity expanded access. Each fluctuation altered how the estate functioned. These adjustments were rarely visible to visitors. They were felt internally. The emotional reality was vigilance. Plans were made years ahead, then rewritten. Preservation demanded foresight without certainty. The consequence was institutional resilience. The estate became skilled at absorbing shock without collapse. This ability distinguishes it from many contemporaries that failed. Survival was not accidental. It was learned. Mistakes informed restraint. Excess gave way to calculation. The building's presence feels constant because adaptation happens quietly. Historians emphasize that this silence is deceptive. Continuity requires continuous effort. Without it, decline accelerates rapidly. This awareness governs every decision today. The house is not frozen in time. It is balanced against it. Visitors sense stability. Operators manage fragility. That duality defines the present condition. The estate exists in a narrow corridor between decay and relevance. This corridor must be walked daily. The unresolved question sharpens once more. How long can adaptation substitute for origin before a place becomes something entirely new? In the end, the mansion resists a single reading. It is not merely a monument to wealth. It is not solely a lesson in excess. It is a record of choices made under pressure and revised under necessity. Each era left evidence. Some visible, some buried. Visitors carry away different impressions because the structure accommodates contradiction. Grandeur and fragility coexist. Silence and activity overlap. History and speculation share space without resolution. This complexity sustains interest. It prevents closure. That is its quiet strength. The estate does not demand belief. It invites observation. Paranormal narratives persist because uncertainty is permitted. Historical narratives endure because documentation remains firm. Neither eliminates the other. The house functions as a mirror for expectation. What one brings determines what is felt. This dynamic ensures longevity. Places that insist on a single meaning often fade. This one adapts by allowing questions to survive. The final reflection is unavoidable and deliberately unanswered. When a creation outlives its creator, its context, and even its original purpose, does its continued existence honor the past, or does it reveal how survival itself becomes the dominant story worth preserving? What remains most striking is how normal this endurance has become. The systems run. The schedules hold. Repairs proceed without ceremony. Survival no longer feels dramatic. It feels procedural. This quiet persistence changes how the mansion is perceived. Grandeur fades into routine. Awe becomes background. The emotional shift is subtle resignation, not failure, acceptance. The building is no longer proving anything. It is managing itself against time. The consequence is a different kind of power, not dominance, but longevity. Many structures were grander in ambition. Few lasted as long. This one did because it learned restraint late, but effectively. Visitors often sense something heavy here without naming it. That weight comes from accumulation. Decisions layered on decisions. Effort stacked on effort. Nothing dramatic is required to sustain it now. Only continuity. This reveals an uncomfortable truth about monumental creation. The hardest phase is not building. It is continuing. That continuation demands attention without applause, money without spectacle, labor without recognition. The estate survives because it embraced this reality. The question that follows is not romantic. It is practical. How many great works disappear simply because no one is willing to maintain them quietly for long enough?